and we're ready to rock and roll. Okay, so Mishnah says as follows. Mishnah says that we finished with tens, and now we're on to sevens. So again, we know that in these Mishnayos that we've been learning, the numbers are important. We've been doing the tens of creation. We've been doing the tens of the tests between Abraham and Noah, the tens between the tests that were given to Avram Avinu, the tens that had to do with the 10 commandments, and that had to do with the 10 plagues, and with the 10 times that we tested God, and then with the 10 things that were created on Erev Shabbos. The Mishnah finishes with the tens, and the Mishnah now talks about sevens. And it's not because it's convenient, as we're going to see, but there's something very important about the number 7 that is the next in the progression of numbers, and that the Mishnah is trying to teach us a message specifically here with the number 7. So Shiva Dvarim Begolem. There are 7 things that we say about a golem. The Shiva B'chacham, and 7 with a chacham. So I know that there's got to be somebody out there thinking, 7 things about a golem? You mean a golem is real? Now, it happens to be that if you've ever visited Prague, so you know that when you went to the Altnai Shul in Prague, so your very nice tour guide told you that the reason why you can't go upstairs in the Altnai Shul is because there's a golem hiding in the closet, right? And he's, they've closed it off for 500 years and nobody can go up there. Like, they tell you all these kind of stories, and they're probably not true. There is probably no golem sitting up there in the attic, and there's no a very, very good chance that the Maharal never built a golem. Is it possible to build a golem? It's possible to build a golem. The concept of golem is not necessarily out of the realm of possibilities for things that could happen. There is such a thing called the Sefer Yetzirah, which is a Kabbalistic work, which is something that a master in Kabbalah, and I'm not talking about it from the Kabbalah Center, I'm talking about a person of Kedusha and Tara that is a master in Kabbalah. So such a person would be able to actually, the possibility of creating is there. In other words, but it's only a golem, meaning that you can create a clump that has a certain life force to it, does not have intelligence, can't speak, doesn't have bechira, doesn't really have free choice, but it's a rudimentary being. There are stories of such a thing being built in our history. They could be true. There certainly is a story. There is a very famous story that was modeled after our golem, and that's called Frankenstein. That was modeled after the concept of a golem, but that's not what the Mishnah is referring to when the Mishnah calls a golem. Now, in your English translation that you have in front of you, that I put online, so it says there are 7 things characterized in a clod, and basically that's what a golem is. A golem, we're going to see. I'm going to define it much better in a few minutes, but
excuse me, Rabbi, we don't see anything on the screen.
Oh. I'm not on the chat. If you go into the chat, you have one of those buttons on the bottom is chat. Click into the chat and you should see the Mishnah on the side. No, you're not seeing it?
I'm in the Zoom chat, but it's not here. Tessie also just says it's not here.
Okay. I'm going to send it one more time and then tell me if you see it. And if not, then I'll put it up on the screen. Do you see it?
Nope.
It was still not. Okay. Don't worry. I will. I'll do this. Just take me a second to do it. I'll put it up on a shared screen for a little bit. Okay, there we go. Everybody can see it. Can everybody see it now? Nice and big. Okay, so Shiva Devarim B'Golim v'Shiva B'Chacham. There are 7 things that are characteristic in a klad. And I'm going to define better in a few minutes what a klad is. But that is, we're dealing tonight with a golem in the sense that an unrefined person, and a person who really is just taking up space, not really making any kind of contribution, which we're going to see exactly what that is in a few minutes. And it's very interesting that the Mishnah begins by saying that there are 7 things about a golem and the 7 in the chacham, and then it goes on to describe the chacham, not the golem. So the chacham is a person who is eno medaber b'fnei mishu gadol mimenu, who doesn't speak in front of somebody who is gadol mimenu b'chachma b'minyan, somebody who is greater than him in wisdom and in an age. In other words, somebody who is more developed than he is. I'm going to read them first, and then we'll discuss them. V'eino nichnas divrei chavero, and he doesn't cut people off when they try to talk. Ve'eno nivhal lahashiv, and he doesn't answer quickly. Shoel ki'inyan u'meshiv ka'alacha, he asks what's relevant and he answers to the point. Va'omer al rishon v'al acharon acharon, and he answers the first question first, the second question second. V'al mashalo shoma, and concerning that which he has not heard. So then, Omer lo shamati, he's willing to say, I don't know. Umoda ala emes, and he acknowledges the truth. V'chilufeim b'golim, and the opposite of these characteristics are in a klad. It's a very interesting Mishnah. Who's the Mishnah talking to? Is the Mishnah talking to a Talmid Chacham? These are great qualities to have, but if I had to write a list of 7 qualities of a Talmid Chacham, they wouldn't be these. These sound like the 7 qualities of a person who is a refined person, a person who is a kuth person, a person who is a good person, who doesn't cut people off. He talks to relevant points. He doesn't just babble. A person who acknowledges the truth, a person who's willing to admit that he doesn't know. Why are those the definitions of a chacham? First of all, if he was a chacham, then he would know. He wouldn't have to say, I don't know. And if he was a real chacham, then he wouldn't have to acknowledge the truth. He would only be speaking the truth. So who's being described here in this Mishnah? And why does the Mishnah make such a big point about, not a person let's start from the beginning of the list. A person doesn't speak before somebody who's greater than him in wisdom. I don't know if you've ever witnessed it yourself, but I have, because I've been on the other side of it. But when somebody would ask me a question, there'd be somebody else standing around, and the other person would jump in with an answer. Look, I'm not saying that I'm a wise person. All I can tell you is that I get paid to do this. This is professional. And if somebody asks a professional opinion, let the professional answer. You want to then afterwards say, well, what about this? What about this? Go right ahead. But very often what I would do is, if there were other rabbis around, just so that I could hear from other rabbis. I mean, I love to hear the way others think out things and develop things. So I would often turn to another rabbi and say, what do you think about this? If somebody would ask a halachic question or some kind of thought question, and there were other people standing around, I would give somebody a chance to be able to, but I wouldn't, if they, excuse me, especially if the person was a great scholar, I certainly wouldn't jump in with an answer. I don't think that you would then describe me as a wise person. You describe me as a person with manners. Not cutting off people when they talk, that's just bad behavior. Not letting a person finish a sentence, that's just bad behavior. It's got nothing to do with being wise. It's just bad. And speaking to the first point first and the last point last, again, that's just like being a grown-up. You're talking in an organized way. So what's the point of the Mishnah? Who is this Mishnah talking to? Who is the Chacham that we're talking? Are we talking to a Talmud Chacham? Are we talking to a Torah scholar? Are we talking to general scholarship and knowledge? Who exactly is the Mishnah addressing? Okay, that's problem number one. So I think that we have to explain the Mishnah like this. I'm going to take it off of shared screen because it's just easier when I see everybody. Okay, so I think we have to explain the Mishnah this way. A lot of times you'll say about a person, that guy's smart, right? That's a smart person. And you're not necessarily talking about the fact that they have encyclopedic knowledge or even a depth of knowledge. We nowadays use a word called they just get it. They just get it means that they understand boundaries. They understand that everything has its place. They understand they have a certain sensitivity. And that this Mishnah, I think, is really a presentation about general chachma, about general wisdom. And all 7 of these are really the essence of chachma. They're the essence of wisdom, because a chacham is a person who has a seder, a person who has has a certain sense of organization. Wisdom doesn't just fall into the head. It has to be understood and has to be studied methodically. And a person has to understand, to be a wise person, a person has to understand everything has its place, everything has its purpose, everything has a value, has to understand boundaries. It's not talking about necessarily Torah Chachma. It's talking about general Chachma. To be a person, you can have a lot of knowledge and be a person who's not wise at all. Wisdom comes from understanding how the world works, understanding how things are valuable, how things are purposeful, how this could be important, and how things lay inside of the world. I think that the reason why the Mishnah uses the number 7 is because it could have used 6 things in a chacham, and it could have used 9 things in a chacham, right? Or they could have done 5 things in a chacham. And as the numbers were open, this could have been a Mishnah anywhere, and in any context. But the reason why it chose 7 is because 7 is the number for Seder. It's the number for order. Because when God created the world, he created the world in 7 days. And when he created the world, he created order in the world. He created Seder in the world. That everything has its place. Everything has its job. Everything has its task. If you look carefully in the story of creation, it says very often that God created this particular object, uminehu, and its type and its kind, which means that every kind was sort of grouped together. Every different species was grouped together and had its particular place in creation. It's also, if you go into it a little bit, it's fascinating that the creation created a box. It was really 6 days of creation, and then the 7th day was Shabbos. If you look at a box has 6 sides. None of the sides have any relationship with each other than they are perpendicular to each other or parallel to each other. Now, they're only touching because they're coming one off the other. They're making a turn, but they're not connected to each other, because everything in creation has its own place. But they do have something common together. If you take a point from each one of the sides, they radiate into the center, and the center puts the whole thing together. The center ties it all into one neat package. Now, if you use the 6 days as being the 6 days of creation, the 7th day is Shabbos, and Shabbos ties in each one of the other days. In other words, all 6 days come together in a crescendo at that center point in between them, which is Shabbos. And that center point then fuels out to each one of the days, and it then gives them the energy, which is why we say that there's two aspects of Shabbos. Shabbos is the culmination of the week, but Shabbos is also the beginning of the week, which means that when the Talmud says that if the Jews were to keep two Shabbosos, then Messiah would come, what the Talmud might mean is not necessarily that if all the Jews kept two Shabbosos, but if they kept one Shabbos with both aspects, the aspect of the conclusion of the week and the aspect of the beginning of the week radiating out to all of the other days of the week. So then if all Jews were to do that, then Mashiach would come. But Shabbos ties everything in, which speaks to this concept of order. It's the shape of order. God used the number 7 to structure nature. Now, which month is the beginning of the year? Tishrei. In the Torah, what number is Tishrei given? So you would think it's given number 1. Tishrei is called the 7th month because number 1 is Nisan. So if you count from Nisan, the 7th month of the year is Tishrei. And that everything in the year revolves around Tishrei. Everything in the year revolves around Rosh Hashanah, revolves around Yom Kippur, revolves around that period of time. And therefore, that month has that ability to unify everything. Now, if you look at the 7th one of these qualities that we spoke about in the Mishnah, the 7th quality is a person who is Modeh al ha'emes, a person who confesses the truth. What's the ultimate unifier? Like the 7th day is the unifier for the other 6 and creates one whole. The ultimate unifier, number 7, is emes, is truth. Truth is fascinating. We say, and truth is a unifier, because we say, Titein emes li Yaakov, give truth to Yaakov. Yaakov was the unifier of the forefathers. We have Avraham, chesed, kindness, Yitzchak, power, gevura, and then the thing that ties those two together is emes, is Yaakov, is truth. Because if you have too much chesed, you could destroy the world and a person. If you have too much rigidity, then you can destroy everything. But there has to be a balance between rigidity and kindness, and that balance is called truth. That balance is Yaakov. And therefore, Yaakov, emes, truth, is a unifier. And when it's placed in position number 7, 7 is the ultimate unifier of all the different pieces, right? That all 6 pieces come together in the center, come together in the 7th. And that's the thing that unifies them. And the Mishnah is telling us that it's putting it in the 7th place, because the Mishnah is telling us that everything has its place. There is an order. There is a seder to the world that we live in. It's not just that we're sitting inside of some big, vast space, but there is seder to every single part of it. And that seder comes together. And when that seder comes together, when it's unified, so then there is knowledge and wisdom and understanding. We'll develop this now further. If you look at the unifier at the number 7, you look at emes, at truth. Truth says it all. The reason why emes is a unifier is because the word emes is unity. Because if you look, the aleph is the first letter of the alphabet, the mem is the middle of the alphabet, and the taf is the last letter of the alphabet. And therefore the word emes spans the entirety of the alphabet, and therefore it drags and draws the whole thing together. It's very interesting. If you look at the word for lie is sheker, which is falsehood. Which letters are sheker? The last 3 letters of the alphabet. Now, it can't be the last letter, taf, because that's already used in emes. So now go one back from taf, kuf, resh, shin. Those are the letters of sheker. But those aren't balanced. They're jumbled. Kuf, resh, shin is not the order. The order is shin, kuf, resh in the word sheker, because that's what sheker is. A lie is something that doesn't have seder. It doesn't have order. There isn't a beginning and a middle and an end. Truth lies in seder. Truth lies in order. When things are organized and things are ordered, then you can see the truth. A lot of times, even in the what seems to be a lack of order, if you look carefully, you'll see order. There's a section of the Torah called the Tocha, called the curses. In the section of the Torah and the curses, the blessings, it's blessings and curses. In the blessings, it starts with an aleph and it ends with a tuf. And you can see it mamish clear. Starts with an aleph, ends with a tuf. There's seder, there's order. It goes straight through the alphabet. Beautiful. And then the Torah goes on to the curses, and the curses start with a vav, with a vav, and they end with a hey. And there's no seder, there's no order. But if you look again, there's definitely order. And the order is that it goes around, and even though it's backwards, that it goes from vav to hey, but nevertheless in that cacophony, in that noise, there is a seder, there is an order to things. And if you look at our world and you look carefully, you'll see that everything that's good, everything that's right in the world is seder, is when there is an order to things. That's the way you identify a chacham, the way you identify a wise person. A wise person is a person that understands their place and understands that everything in this world has a place. You know, there are certain mitzvos in the Torah that teach us this. Milk and meat. You ever wonder why you can't mix milk and meat? Why that's a basic tenet, really, of Judaism? You know, there's a commandment that you can't mix wool and linen in the same garment. Wool and flax, same garment, can't mix it. When we buy a suit, we get it tested for shatnez. You get it tested to make sure that there isn't wool and linen that was, linen threads in a wool suit. You can wear a wool shirt and linen pants, but wool and linen in the same garment is prohibited by the Torah. Yeah, I don't know if anybody ever died from wearing wool and linen. What's the problem with wool and linen? You can't take an ox and a donkey and put them in the same yoke in order to be able to pull a wagon. You can't mix grapes and other vegetables and growth and wheat in the same area. There has to be a separation between them. Jews and non-Jews can't connect together. What's that all about? Because everything in this world has its place. Everything in this world has its purpose, and we can't mix them together. God created meat. He created milk. He created wool. He created linen. Everything has its place. And in the Torah, God defined what each of those places are. And God defined that these are the things, by giving us these commandments, these are the things that need to remain separated and disconnected from each other, because that's part of the Seder, it's part of the order of the world. Every person and every nation has its place in this world. Originally, when God gave the Torah, it was supposed to be given both to the Jewish people and to Esav. The two of us were supposed to stand together at the foot of Mount Sinai. Esav was going to receive the Torah of the physical world. Yaakov was going to receive the Torah, so to speak, of the spiritual world. And together as a group, together as a team, we were going to keep and bring the Torah to the world. The 70 nations of the world were meant to be the backup singers. They were meant to be the ones, the support team, that each one of them brought something into the picture, and each one of them was supposed to be a part of this whole concept of the receiving of the Torah. That was the way that it was supposed to be. But then Esav gave up his connection to Torah. The 70 nations of the world gave up their connection of the Torah, but it doesn't mean that they don't have a value within the context of Judaism. And I'll give you an example. The Torah tells us, Som tasim alecha melech, that you have to place a king on you, and that we have a mitzvah, we have a commandment, that when we get into the land of Israel, we have to set up a king. There's only one small problem. We don't have the ability to be kings. Why is that? Because to be a king, there is a certain achzarius, there is a certain hard-heartedness that needs to be part of the qualities of the king that are specifically not Jewish qualities. We say, how do you identify a Jew? Rachmanim, Baishanim, Gomle Chasadim. That we are merciful, we are kind, and we have a sense of modesty. The Talmud says that if you meet a person that is so hard-hearted, it's like shocking how hard-hearted they are, you have to question whether or not they're in fact Jewish. Because that's just not something that's in the strain, that's in the genetic makeup of a Jew. When Avram and Lot were having a disagreement with their shepherds, that the shepherds were grazing in the land of Israel, and Avram said, "You're stealing because it doesn't belong to me yet. It will eventually, but not now. And therefore you have no rights to let your animals free range in the land of Israel." Lot was not bothered by it. Avram Avinu turns to Lot and he says to him that he pared no me olai, separate from me. And that's when they went their separate ways, and Lot went to Sodom. When Avram said those words, he pared no me olai, separate yourself from me. To separate means not just the word pered is a mule. A mule is sterile. That means that what he was saying to him is that you and I have nothing to do with each other anymore. My kids are not going to marry your kids. There's going to be no interaction between our nations. Avraham Avinu completely cut himself off from Lot. Why? Because he felt that Lot, in his hard-heartedness, allowed his people to graze in the land of Israel, meant that he was missing a fundamental part of his character that did not allow him to attach himself to the Jewish people. And therefore, he could never be a productive member of our nation because he was missing one of the three fundamentals of Rachmanim, Baishanim, and Gomle Chasadim. Now, we don't get kicked out when we don't have this, but we can't develop ourselves without this achzarius, without this hard-heartedness, because, for example, you can't have a king. A king needs that. A king needs a hard outer shell. A king needs the ability to be able to put his foot down, the ability to be able to rule his country. So where were we going to get this achzarios? Where were we going to get this hard-heartedness from, this stubbornness, this toughness? Where were we going to get it from? So where did that come into the world? You know, when God destroyed the city of Sodom, he saved Lot and his daughters. Saved his wife also, but she ended up as an advertisement for Morton Salt. She's a pillar sitting somewhere in near Sodom, near the Dead Sea. Now, he and his daughters were up on top of this mountain. They're looking out of the mountain. They see the whole city of Sodom, no region, 5 cities, completely destroyed. His daughters assume that there is no men left in the world. They need to repopulate the world. This is what's going on in their mind. And they decide that the only one who's going to be able to help them repopulate is going to be Dad. Now, it's not the kind of thing they can go to him with a business proposal and say to him, Dad, you know, we got some work to do. So they got him drunk. And they had relations with him. The first one had relations with him, and she had a child. And the second one had relations with him the next night, and also became pregnant and had a child. The first child was called Moab. Moab. What does Moab mean? Me'av. Can you imagine sitting around in a playgroup? Right? And one mother turns to the other and says, what's your kid's name? Oh, Jason. What's your kid's name? Moav, May-Av, from Dad. You know, it's a little weird. It sounds like Arkansas. I mean, it's like a little weird to call your kid May-Av, a gift from Dad. Well, the second one, they called a little bit better. The second one they called, that was a little bit more couched in better terms. They called him Ammon, or Ben Ami, right, a son of my nation. So that could be anything. But these were the two children that were fathered by Lot that were brought into the world. This Moab, the brazenness that Moab had, and we see it as a developed nation, it had an incredible amount of brazenness. The midah of brazenness that was needed in order to be able to have a king was going to be brought to the plate by Moab. They were going to bring that into the Jewish people by standing at the foot of Mount Sinai with us, taking up their part in the Torah. That would have been their contribution. But they gave up that contribution. But we still needed that in order to be able to fulfill this mitzvah. We still needed that brazenness. And therefore, that brazenness had to develop in a Petri dish and then be brought into the Jewish people. Who brought that brazenness into the Jewish people? Rus. Because Rus was a princess of Moab. She was a descendant of the Moabite royalty. And therefore, Rus HaMoaviyah, she converted. And with that conversion, she brought that energy into the Jewish people. Because there is every single nation in the world has a value. Every single nation in the world has a contribution to be made in the service of God. Originally, it would have been made in tandem, standing alongside the Jewish people. But now it needs to be brought into the Jewish people, which is the reason why Chazal say that we are spread in the four corners of the earth. Because we're there to bring back these nitzotzos, to bring back these sparks, and to bring back these contributions to the Jewish people. And they come through converts. That every convert, every real convert in the Jewish people brings back an energy that's necessary to be part of the Jewish people. A chacham is a person that is able to recognize that everything has its place, everything has its purpose, and there is an organization to the world. You know, we look at a person who's a bigot, and often, besides that, it makes us uncomfortable. But we look at the person and say, you're being an idiot. You're talking like an idiot. Because to talk that way means that you don't recognize that there is a seder to the world. A person who can't get along with other people, who constantly puts people down, is a person who doesn't understand that every person has a value. A person who pushes away things in the world and grabs onto other things, not because they're priorities, but just because for them it's more pleasing, is a person who doesn't understand that there is a concept of Seder. Let's develop this further. Because when the Mishnah tells me, if you look carefully, by the way, I'll do that shared screen again. If you look at all 7 of these in the context of the way we just put it, there are 7 things characteristic in a clod and 7 in a wise man. A wise man doesn't speak before one who is greater than he in wisdom. Why? Because he knows his place. He knows, and he's comfortable with knowing that there is a seder, there's an order to the world. There are people that are talmidei chachamim. There are people that are scholars, are real scholars. There are people that are lesser scholars, and he's comfortable with knowing where his place is in that system. Doesn't break into his fellow's speech. Because I know that what you have to say is valuable and that you have something to share also. Because I recognize and understand, again, that everything has its place. Not hasty to answer. Because why would I need to rush into an answer? Let me develop it. Let me think about it. Because if you're putting me on the spot and asking me a question, you want to have that information from me. You want me to come up with an answer to something, to have an opinion on something. Then I have to think that through in a methodical way. It's not, you can't just be haphazard. He asks what's relevant and answers to the point. Again, order, seder. He speaks to the first point and of the last point. In other words, his mind is organized. He recognizes that there is an order, a seder to things. And concerning that which he hasn't heard, he says, I haven't heard. Again, comfortable with his place. And he acknowledges the truth. And he acknowledges the truth. And he acknowledges the truth because he recognizes, again, the value of everything in this world. And I think that the Mishnah, it's a very simple, it's a very simple Mishnah. And it's a very, very simple message. And the message is that you have to be organized, but it's not organized that you have to know 6 o'clock I'm doing this, 7 o'clock I'm doing this, which is also part of it. But you have to recognize that everything has its place and you have to be respectful of that place. And therefore you in this world have a place. Your day has each thing that you need to do has its place. Your understanding, your wisdom, your knowledge, it all has its place. And it's only when you're organized in your mind and in your understanding, only then can you start to understand and come to grips and understanding of the world that you live in. I'll tell you an interesting thing. The Mishnah says that these are the 7 characteristics of a wise person. Does that mean you have to have all 7 of them? Does that mean if you have some of them, then you're okay? You're in. As long as you have 1 or 2, you're good. Not so organized, but you understand your place in the world. Like, is it a package? Is it just a bunch of suggestions? I'll ask you another question. If you've been hanging around Pirkei Avos, you know that we've talked about wisdom before, more than once. Ezu Chacham, who's a wise person? Answer the question. Who's a wise person?
That learns from everybody.
Learns from everybody, right? We've already answered that. And what about the other one? Who's a wise person? Somebody who's roe es hanolad, somebody who sees things that haven't yet happened. Somebody who's able to see the consequences of their actions. That we also term as a chacham, as a wise person.
Of course.
That's not in this list. Why is that not in this list? Because the Mishnah is teaching how to make yourself such a receptacle, how to make yourself this kind of person. It's not about somebody who's already cooked, somebody who's already a wise person, somebody who's a wise person, somebody who's already learned from a teacher, somebody who's already learned something. Then that person now can open up to the rest of the world and can start learning from everybody. That's a person who can start to look at the world and understand that, roas and knowledge, you have to be able to see where you're going, where the ramifications are of the things that you're doing. But when you're trying to develop yourself, when you're trying to develop to become this kind of person, to become a wise person, what you need to develop is you need to develop your perspective on the world. You need to develop this sense of order, this sense of seder. It's a list of how to develop ourselves into being a receptacle for wisdom. And as soon as you begin on that path, you're called a chacham. As soon as you show in these 7 ways that you have an understanding and an appreciation and a sensitivity to the fact that everything has its place and everything has its time, and there is appropriate and inappropriate, there are good times and there are bad times. Everything has an organization and everything has a seder. Once you start to understand that and you show that you understand that, that's when you stepped over your line and you are now in this group called a chacham. It doesn't matter how much you know. It matters what you understand, because understanding is going to bring you to chachma. And chachma is not about the amount of pages of Talmud that you know. Chachma is not about the amount of things you know. The chachma is about your understanding of your placement in the world and the world's makeup, the world's general, the order, the organization of the world. And once you understand that, so then you can truly become a wise person, because you can understand that everything plays a role and everything has a place. That's why we don't say those 2 characteristics, because they aren't about growing. They're about those who've already grown, and those are tools of perfection. These that we're presenting in the Mishnah are tools of perfection. The opposite of a chacham is a golem. Who is a golem? A golem is a person that's not seeking knowledge. A golem is a person that's just a blob, taking up space, but doesn't understand his relationship to that space, doesn't understand his purpose, doesn't understand that everything has its place and purpose. And that's why you need all 7 of these, because all 7 of these give a person a full picture and a full perspective of the world that they live in. I'll just leave you with an incredible maisa. Rabbi Ezel Charif was a very great Torah scholar looking for a son-in-law. he went to the yeshiva in Volozhin, and he was looking for the best guy in the yeshiva in Volozhin. But instead of giving a test to each and every guy, he came into the yeshiva and he asked a question. And the guy who was going to be able to answer the question, that was going to be the guy who was going to marrying his daughter. So he asked the question. Guys are tzuchtzaching about the question. They're going over it. And he doesn't like any of the answers. So Basil decides, not this group. As he's leaving the yeshiva, there's a fellow that runs out. And he says, Rabbi, what's the answer? So Basil looks at him and says, that's the guy. That's the guy for my daughter. The guy had no idea what the answer to the question was. But somebody asked the question, he needed to know the answer. That guy had a desire to learn. Once there is a desire to learn, once there is a desire to grow, so then that is the beginning of the process. I want to be a chacham. I want to understand this world better. Once there is that desire to understand, that is the beginning of chachma. That's the beginning of wisdom. Okay, I got to stop here. Next week, we're going to talk about Hanukkah. I have a very, very unique, beautiful idea about Hanukkah. Anyway, you'll hear it next week. It's not my usual Hanukkah Torah, which, I bank on the fact that year after year nobody remembers anyway. But I have a mamish a beautiful idea, which I think will give us the essence of what Hanukkah is all about. Okay, I wish everybody a wonderful, wonderful night, a wonderful week, a beautiful Hanukkah, and
Thank you so
we'll
much.
see you all next Monday night.
Thank you so much.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thanks, Rabbi.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Good to see everybody.
Thank you so much.